Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, sadly for Australian families, when it comes to economic management, Labor doesn't have a clue. The government has delivered 2 budgets and families are worse off as a result of your decisions. Labor is driving up prices and killing the economy. When will the Prime Minister admit he has got it wrong?
How's that a question? Just a
Order. Members on my right, the member for Swan is warned. Time is not to interject while questions are being presented. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for that word salad from the Leader of the Opposition.
Order.
The fact is that what we have done is produce a responsible budget. We did that now more than 3 weeks ago, and that budget, of course, took pressure off cost of living through the measures that we had.
Order.
On $3 billion plan for energy, our plan for cheaper medicines, our cheaper childcare plan comes in 1 month from today. 1 month from today. And all of the policies that we put forward, of course, in our budget were fully costed. And I'm asked about government and policy processes and how they impact people. Well, a couple of days after the Treasurer handed down the budget, I note a budget in which I think he might have got one question about the budget ever since in the 3 weeks. In the 3 weeks since from those opposite.
Member for
on the
O'Connor.
3 weeks ago, the opposition leader gave his budget reply, and at that he had a centrepiece of his budget reply was a policy about JobSeeker, but he failed to release any costings on the night. Failed to release any costings on the night, on the 11th of May. On the 15th of May, he said this: we probably about half of what Labor's proposing to their own measure was his costing. Probably about half. Then on the 16th of May, The Australian reported, in recent days the coalition has briefed out 2 competing costings for its policy, $700 million and in the order of $2.3 billion.
Order.
Close.
Treasurer will cease interjecting.
The next day, The Australian reported, opposition leader Peter Dutton has conceded he doesn't know the cost of his marquee budget reply proposal. And then earlier that day he went on Sky to clean it up and he said this: I mean, the difference in the costings is around the parameters and the assumptions, and the Parliamentary Budget Office will finalise that work and that'll be released in due course. 21 days later, no one's still the wiser.
Order.
Imagine if a Labor leader of the opposition had released a centrepiece of a budget reply and 3 weeks later said, well, it'll all appear in due course, and it might be hundreds of millions, it might be billions, we don't know what it is, we don't know what it'll cost, we don't know what the impact will be. Fair dinkum. You're just not up to it.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Deakin will cease interjecting. The Minister for Indigenous Australians will cease interjecting. The member for Deakin will cease interjecting. So will the Minister for Indigenous Australians. So I can hear from the member for Swan.
My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. 1 month from today, the Albanese Labor government's changes to make early learning more affordable come into effect. How will the changes benefit the Australian economy by unlocking the full potential of women's workforce participation?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Swan for her excellent question. Indeed, a timely reminder that in just 30 days, the Albanese Labor government's landmark reforms to early learning will come into effect, benefiting over 1.2 million families right across Australia, including 6,900 families in the member for Swans electorate, 7,700 families in the electorate of Hume, 5,800 families in the electorate of Corangamite, 7,500 families in Longman, 5,200 families in the electorate of Goldstein, and 265,000 families in rural and regional Australia. Delivering on our commitment to real relief to household budgets of families who we know are struggling with the cost of living, while also improving economic security for women, Mr Speaker. Now, for the average family on about $120,000 a year with one child in care for 3 days a week, those changes will cut costs by $1,700 a year. $1,700. That's money that makes a real difference to families right now. And these reforms pay economic dividends right now, but they also build our country's future. They lay the foundations for a better future, giving children the very best start in life, giving them the foundational skills they need to continue on and be successful in learning and be successful in work. But we also know that early childhood education and care benefits Australian women who are often the primary carers, because too often the cost of early learning means that women's choices to participate in the workforce or to take on study are limited. And that means that the economic benefits of women's participation can't be fully realised. Our reforms are going to unlock that full potential, boosting productivity by giving women and families more choice. Now, Mr Speaker, I know firsthand how important early childhood education was in my life and the choices it afforded me to go back to study, to go back to work, to give my sons a different life. And I want all women in Australia to have that choice. According to Danielle Wood from the Grattan Institute, making early childhood education more affordable is, I quote, a rare win-win-win policy. It's a win for families, it's a win for children, it's a win for women, it's also a win for the economy, and, Mr Speaker, it's a win for the future of our country.
Getting close to being warned. Just, if the member for Moncrieff continues to interject, she will be warned. I give the call to the member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In November, in an interview with the Australian newspaper, the Prime Minister said he would spend whatever was necessary to produce the Defence Force that could defend Australia. But this week, the Department of Defence confirmed in budget estimates that the government has cut $1.5 billion from the Australian Defence Force. Australia is in the most challenging strategic environment since the Second World War. Why is the Prime Minister breaking promises and making it harder for the ADF to keep our country safe?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Very keen to have the opportunity to add to this answer.
Order.
The fact is that what we have done is produce a defence strategic review, aimed at what assets does Australia need to defend ourselves, where should they be placed, and actually delivering it. If you can't defend your country with a press release, and what we saw from those opposite is a press release. And indeed, the member himself said this, who served as the Assistant Minister for Defence under the Leader of the Opposition, the new Dream Team here, the new 1 and 2 Dream Team. He said this: as the Assistant Defence Minister, I saw a lot of waste. There are always savings to be made. So we're not arguing that there should be no cuts. We want to just make sure they are done in a considered way. If they are done, we also want certainty. Funding AUKUS will require sacrifices. That's what the former Assistant Minister for Defence said, answering his own question. This is questions and answers from the one side today.
Order. Members on my right, the Leader of the House. Order. Members on the Minister for Infrastructure. Order. I want to hear from the member for Canning on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It goes to relevance, bringing back to the question, which is why is he breaking promises and making it harder for the Australian Defence Force to do its job?
Prime Minister has a preamble. I'm listening carefully to make sure he's referring to the estimates and other parts of the question. And I give him the call.
Mr Speaker, because on the 31st of October 2022, the member said this: yes, we squandered a lot of opportunity through the leadership changes. He went on to say it created ministerial churn, which led to inertia institutionally, and I think it meant we delayed a lot of those decisions. It's been a criticism, and I think a valid one. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. But of course it was consistent with his leader, because he said this. The former Defence Minister on the 15th of August last year said,
Order.
I wish that we could have acquired more capability within Defence earlier. Oh, if only he was in a position. If only he was in a position to do something as the Defence Minister to acquire more capability. Fair dinkum, fair dinkum. But the Nats haven't missed out either, Mr Speaker, you'll be pleased. Because the leader of the National Party said this on the 13th of March. I think Defence has to put their hand up and acknowledge that much of their procurement over many decades across many different governments has been ordinary at best. Ordinary at best. Give him another one.
Order.
You've got to ask the question why some of these people still have jobs, to be candid. Indeed you do.
Order. The Minister for Pacific Island Affairs will cease being disorderly. Order. I want to hear from the Minister for Defence. I want to hear from the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. How has the Albanese Labor government delivered on its key commitment to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission after almost a decade of inaction?
Good question.
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the member for Higgins for her question. It's been a busy first year in government. Ahead of the last election, the Albanese Labor government pledged that if the Australian people gave us the honour of governing this nation, we would repay their trust by returning integrity, honesty and accountability to government. Labor told Australians that if we were elected, we would legislate a National Anti-Corruption Commission in 2022, and we did. We said that we would establish the inaugural leadership team through a merit-based selection process, and we did. We said we would have the Commission operational by mid-2023, and we will. I'm very pleased to advise the House that the National Anti-Corruption Commission will commence operation on the 1st of July this year. We said we would deliver a watchdog with teeth and without delay, and that is just what we have done. Those opposite also promised to deliver a National Anti-Corruption Commission. They promised at the last election. Indeed, they promised at the election before that. The Australian people waited for over 3 years, but those opposite never even introduced a bill to Parliament. They were never serious about it. Well, this government is serious about tackling corruption. We are committed to cleaning up the mess left by those opposite. We've honoured our commitment to legislate a powerful, transparent and independent National Anti-Corruption Commission, and this is yet another example of the Albanese Labor government delivering for the Australian people in our first 12 months in office.
Order. Give the call to the member for Gippsland. Give the call to the member for Calare.
To the Treasurer. Treasurer, today I spoke with Scott Goodkin, who is from Mudgee and runs a small business with his wife Barbara called Mudgee Music. It's a music shop, and Scott also teaches bass guitar along with 3 other music teachers. Scott told me that if interest rates keep rising, Mudgee Music and other small businesses face a very bleak future. What is the government doing to bring interest rate relief to home and business owners like Scott and Barbara?
Order. The member for Fisher. been pretty clear all week about interjecting before ministers speak. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Calare for his question and for his representation of small businesses in his local community. I think everybody in this place understands that one of the big pressures on small business and on mortgagees more broadly is the fact that ever since last year interest rates have been going up and people have had to find more in their monthly household or small business budget to cover higher interest rates. I think that is self-evident and well understood. What we have tried to do in the budget, and I'm confident what we have done in the budget that we handed down towards the beginning of last month, is to do what we can to address some of the issues in the economy which are pushing up inflation. Now, we don't preempt or second-guess the decisions taken independently by the Reserve Bank and its board, but what we do is to work out where government can make a meaningful difference when it comes to inflation. And inflation was the primary influence on the May 2023 budget in at least three ways. First of all, providing responsible cost of living relief where we can without adding to these inflationary pressures. The Reserve Bank Governor said yesterday that he believes, from his point of view, that the budget is not adding to inflation. If anything, it's taking the pressure off inflation. And he said yesterday in his testimony that there's nothing in the budget which makes him revisit his thinking about interest rates into the future. Secondly, we know that we need to deal with issues in the supply side of the economy, and that's why we've got big investments, whether it's energy, technology, people and skills, and in trying to repair busted supply chains which are pushing up prices and pushing up interest rates as well. And the third thing we did is we showed spending restraint in the budget to get the budget in much better nick, to make sure the budget's not adding these inflationary pressures, and also to rebuild some of the buffers in the budget. That's why we're forecasting a surplus this year. That's why we've banked such a big proportion of the upward revision in revenue. So we do understand. My message is to your small businesses and to the mortgagees in your part of the country, wonderful part of the country, is that we do understand the pressures that they're under. The Reserve Bank takes its decisions independently. We take responsibility for what we can influence, whether it's cost of living relief, spending restraint in the budget, or dealing with the supply side issues in the economy. We take those responsibilities seriously and we're acting on them.
Give the call to the member for Corwell.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. After a decade of wage stagnation, why is getting wages growing again central to the Albanese government's economic plan?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for her question, also for her experience and her dedication that she brings to this place. Mr Speaker, we said we would get wages moving again in responsible ways, and we are. Wages are growing faster and more people are getting wage rises since the Albanese government came to office. Wages grew by 3.7% over the year to the March quarter. That's the fastest growth in over a decade. And 60% of jobs recorded a higher wage rise than the year before. That's the highest proportion on record and around double the pre-pandemic average. Now, Mr Speaker, we are pleased that wages are moving again and more Australians are seeing the benefits of higher wages. But we do know that many Australians are doing it tough, and we need to see inflation moderate to secure that real wages growth we want to see in our economy. And that's why our budget and our plan is all about taking the pressure off inflation. And the Reserve Bank Governor said yesterday that he believes that it will. But let's be really clear, Mr Speaker. We don't have an inflation challenge in our economy because people on the lowest incomes are being paid too much. This side of the House understands that strong and sustainable wages growth is part of the solution to cost of living pressures felt by many Australians and not part of the problem, as those opposite want to pretend. As the Reserve Bank Governor said yesterday, nominal wage growth at the moment isn't a problem, and nominal wage growth has not been the source of inflation. I want to make that clear. The Treasury Secretary made similar comments earlier in the week. There are no signs of a wage price spiral developing. Tomorrow, the Fair Work Commission, Mr Speaker, will hand down its decision on minimum and award wages. and we will respect whatever decision the independent umpire makes. But the Albanese government will always do what we can to support the wages of workers, particularly the lowest paid workers in our economy. That's why we've supported wage rises for minimum and award wage workers. We funded pay rises for aged care workers in the budget. We changed the law to support secure jobs and better pay. We're making it easier for parents to return to work when they want to, and we're investing in industries that create secure, well-paid jobs into the future. Mr Speaker, getting wages moving again is a deliberate design feature of the Albanese Labor government. We are proud of the progress that we've made, but we know that we need to do much more to get the real wages growth that people need and deserve in the economy. The contrast couldn't be clearer, Mr Speaker. Those opposite want lower wages, they want more expensive medicines, and they voted for higher energy prices to make the cost of living challenge in our economy even worse.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Through the budget process, this Labor government awarded a $23 million Cyber Wardens grant without tender, which will benefit the Labor-aligned company 89 Degrees East. A spokesperson for the Minister for Health, quoted in the media, confirmed the measure had been brought before the Expenditure Review Committee of Cabinet. Did any ministers declare a conflict of interest at the meeting of the Expenditure Review Committee when this grant was approved?
Give the call to the Prime Minister. Order. Order. The groans are not parliamentary. The member for Barker is warned.
Thanks very much.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Very much. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm not sure whether the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has ever been on the ERC, but if she had ever been on an ERC, she would know the answer to that question. Is obviously that the ERC doesn't consider those levels of detail. It's just never dealt with at a meeting of the Expenditure Review Committee. It's not what we do when we're putting together a budget. It's not what the former government did.
Order.
And it's not what this government did.
Order.
So as to be,
the member for Casey is warned.
So the grant that the member referred to was a grant to Cosboa, and it's a matter for them which contractors they engage to administer the program.
Order. Give the call to the member for Bruce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Industry and Science. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to ensure that the growth of artificial intelligence technologies in Australia is responsible and safe?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Bruce for the question and also his engagement on this issue. In fact, there are a number of parliamentarians that have thought deeply about this matter. The member for Higgins, I want to congratulate her, and also the member for Curtin, who's raised these matters, because it is something that the community is thinking deeply about. And the Albanese government is determined to support the uptake of technologies in a way that are fair, inclusive and reflect community interest. And fairness and inclusivity are core values for our government. These values have informed all technology-related policy in my portfolio, and they've guided our work, for example, to grow the tech workforce in Australia. I'm pleased to say that this week we announced we've reached 935,000 jobs, up 8% since last year, and we're well on our way to reaching our tech jobs target of 1.2 million jobs by 2030. We want to maximise the benefit of technology in ways that benefit us, and while also having a clear focus on curbing risk. It's been estimated AI could add about $1 trillion to $4 trillion to our economy over the next 15 years. But recent AI models are being adopted at speed and scale, and there is concern in the community about the pace at which the technology is developing. Our government respects this concern. That's why we're acting. In February, the Albanese government commissioned the National Science and Technology Council to provide a rapid report on the development of generative AI, and the report provided a consensus position from our science and research community on immediate trends in AI. And today, we've announced the next step in making sure we have modern laws to manage modern technology. which is why the Albanese government released a discussion paper and the NSTC paper to help guide that work. Our discussion paper is Safe and Responsible AI in Australia, looks at existing regulatory and governance mechanisms in our country. It sets out actions being taken in other parts of the world. It considers whether additional risk-based rules are needed. It sets the strictest safety rules for high-risk uses of AI. It also wants to be clear on the kind of transparency and monitoring required for AI being able to be used to be making decisions about people's lives. And the discussion paper is backed by an immediate investment in industry adopting AI in responsible ways. Today's discussion paper brings together several Albanese government values: being a government that acts on science, is led by science, drawing on our National Science and Technology Council expertise, working together across portfolios. Ministers Burke, Dreyfus, Clare, Rowland, Gallagher, all looking at these issues deeply, integrating national wellbeing and economic prosperity. Again, we want modern laws to manage modern technology.
The call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Health. I refer to media comments from the Minister's office last night claiming the Minister had nothing to declare when ERC awarded the $23 million Cyber Wardens grant. At Senate estimates today, it was confirmed the Prime Minister put in place a specific conflict of interest protocol for the Minister on matters relating to 89 Degrees East. Given the Minister is under this prime ministerial direction, why didn't he recuse himself from the decision to award this grant, which benefits 89 Degrees East?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome this question because I and the rest of my ministerial colleagues, I can tell you, take the Prime Minister's mandatory ministerial code of conduct very, very seriously. After my appointment as the Minister for Health, I made all of the appropriate declarations to the Prime Minister that are required by the code. Out of an abundance of caution, that included my wife's engagement with 89 Degrees East, in spite of the fact that her contract for services with that company had concluded in late 2021 in anticipation of the birth of our child. But given the possibility that she might enter a new contract for services at some point in the future, which she did ultimately in February of this year, arrangements are in place to manage any potential conflict consistent with long-standing practice for ministers of both sides of politics and their spouses.
We'll pause. I'll hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Give her the call.
Mr Speaker, and it refers to the Minister's answer, which was why didn't he recuse himself from an ERC decision that his own spokesperson...
Order. We'll hear from the Leader of the House.
On relevance, the Minister is being clearly relevant to the question that was put before him. I get that the Deputy Leader is familiar with the concept of what it does look like when someone breaches a ministerial code.
Order. Order. Ministers on my right will cease interjecting immediately. Manager of Opposition Business.
That is a completely inappropriate comment from the Leader of the House, as he knows well, and he should withdraw it.
Look, to assist the House, if the Manager of Opposition finds that term offensive, I'll just ask the Leader. He was stating he was making a statement. He was making a statement, but if there is offence taken, my process is to... Order. 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 Just the member for Groom, just to assist the House, I couldn't hear the full comment, but if there is an offensive comment made, I'm just going to ask the Leader of the House.
I'm asked on the basis to assist the House. I'll withdraw.
Thank you. Back to the point of order from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The Minister is... I'm listening carefully to his answer. He's going step by step in terms of the process, in terms of what actions have been taken. He is being entirely relevant, and I'll... Order. and I'll ask him to continue, and I'll listen carefully to make sure he is.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I can confirm that at no time has any matter been before me for decision about that company. And were that to happen, I would manage that in accordance with long-standing arrangements followed by both sides of politics about potential conflicts between ministers and their spouses.
Order. Order. Members on my left. Give the call to the member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. How is the Albanese Labor government reversing previous approaches and delivering on its commitment to make Australia's cities and suburbs, including in my electorate of Aston, even better places to live, work and raise a family?
I give the call. Order. The Leader of the Opposition, just while I give the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister just can pause their conversation for a moment. I want to give the call. The Leader of the Opposition, I haven't called the Minister yet. And I'm trying to give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, who's just been asked a question in the House, and she has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank particularly the member for Aston for her question. She knows what it is like to grow up, to raise a family and to work and live within our great suburbs across this country. Well, just over a year ago, the Australian people elected the Albanese Labor government to restore a national vision for our cities and our suburbs, and we're getting on with the work of doing just that. Our government knows just how critical our cities are, driving national productivity, contributing to our cultural identity and housing 2 in every 3 Australians. We want every city and every suburb to be an excellent place to live, with equitable access to the jobs, to the housing, to the services and the infrastructure every Australian deserves. That is why our recent budget delivered significant investment in our cities and our suburbs. We're producing a national urban policy framework which will once again put the Commonwealth at the heart and into the business of shaping our great cities and our suburbs. The work will be guided by experts in design, planning, sustainability, property and housing via the new Urban Policy Forum headed up by the fabulous Professor Barbara Norman, and will work hand in hand with state, territory and local governments to deliver a truly national vision. We're reconvening the planning ministers alongside my ministerial colleagues from around the country to work on issues around housing supply and affordability, climate change, communications and urban environments. And we're delivering real investments in our cities with a new community infrastructure grants program for our cities, suburbs and peri-urban communities, the Thriving Suburbs program. For the first time in recent memory, every single part of Australia has a transparent, open and merits-based program to apply for community infrastructure that they need. And we're establishing a new precincts and partnerships program to invest in city-shaping precincts which deliver significant benefits to our cities. We're looking to fund best practice projects from innovative industrial precincts supporting new ways of working to mixed-use communities while delivering the housing, cultural and commercial opportunities for our cities need. These partnerships will be led by communities because we know nobody knows our cities and our suburbs better than the people who call them home. And we will make these investments through a transparent process with publicly available guidelines so communities aren't pitted against each other for funding decisions made behind closed doors. Our cities are amongst the best in the world, but we know they can be even better. Those opposite left a policy vacuum when it came to cities' agenda and the city space with their city's reference group last meeting in 2019. Instead, we are getting on with the process of making sure we've got the policy settings right to invest in our cities and to invest in our thriving suburbs, because we know that they matter to the people of Australia.
The call to the member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. According to a recent analysis, the Member of Parliament who has accepted the largest amount of tickets and hospitality from the gambling industry is the Minister. The total number of ticket and hospitality packages from the gambling industry accepted by the Minister is 10. Given her role in regulating gambling advertising, does the Minister think this is appropriate?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. The reason why the member knows that information is because I have declared it all as required by the parliament, as every member of parliament is required to do so. And the reason why it is declared is because I follow those rules. Now, I made it very clear some time ago in our public forum, where the honourable member was also present, that I had made a personal decision, although I did comply with all the rules, that I understood there was community concern around this issue, and I made a conscious decision that I would no longer accept any donations from gambling companies, nor hospitality from gambling companies. Now, if the honourable member was asked the same thing, as I do recall, he was unable to answer that question himself. So the member may wish to reflect on his own behaviour in this regard. Now, Mr Speaker, the reality is this.
The member for Petrie.
The policy that this government, and as I administer as minister, along with a number of other ministers, including the Minister for Social Services, when it comes to this area, is based on the solid principle of harm minimisation. This government will be judged on its delivery. And again, I ask, Mr Speaker, the member may wish to reflect on the fact that during their whole time, their nearly 10 years in office, they failed to make a dent in this area, failed to make a dent. They proceeded at a glacial pace when it came to the National Consumer Protection Program, which was designed for this very purpose. They failed when it came to administering their own reports that they received about banning credit cards for online gaming. They failed to act, and they failed to even release the Stevens Review when it came to classification for simulated gambling in children's games. So if the minister wishes to come here and ask any member of this parliament about their commitment to harm minimisation, or in any respect, Shadow Minister, sorry about that. If anyone wishes to come here and reflect on any member of this side, the fact that these matters are known is because A, they are declared, and B, they should be well aware that this government takes its responsibilities very seriously when it comes to that adherence, but also this is a government that will be judged on its record when it comes to harm minimisation, and those opposite failed to deliver in 10 years.
Order. Give the call. Order. Give the call to the member for Fraser.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Cyber Security. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering increased cyber security and resilience to fix the mess left by the previous government?
Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security.
Thank you, Speaker. And can I thank the fantastic member for Fraser for his question and just acknowledge his brilliant advocacy for his community. Speaker, cybersecurity affects the lives of every single Australian, and it is absolutely critical to our national security. So, Speaker, the honourable member is right. It was a great pity for us to arrive in government a year ago to find that Australian cybersecurity was in an absolute mess. We had no policy leadership. We had no real attempt to coordinate the work of cyber being done across government or indeed across the economy. We had no cyber incident response function in the Australian government. We were left with a cybersecurity framework that was 5 years out of date and a privacy framework that was a decade out of date. And none of this is particularly surprising, Speaker, because I'm getting a little bit of interjection. There's a few people who are touchy about this. But, Speaker, none of it is surprising because the truth is that the former government did not even have a cybersecurity minister. So what were they expecting? Now, this astounds me because of the scope and scale.
The Minister will resume her seat. The Manager Opposition will withdraw that comment.
I withdraw.
I ask the Minister in continuation.
Speaker, the absolutely appalling leadership shown by the former government astounds me because of the scope and scale of this problem. We were told last year by the National Australia Bank that they are subject to 50 million cyber attacks a month. The Australian Taxation Office subjected to 3 million cyber attacks a month. And what we know about this problem is that it is likely to get significantly worse over the coming years. We've got changing technology, which the Minister for Science and Industry talked about before, which will radically change this landscape. We've got a geopolitical situation that's very challenging for our country.
Speaker, there is a huge amount of phenomenal work occurring now within the Australian government on this matter. We've set up the Hat the Hackers Task Force, a 100-strong force of ASD and AFP officers who are hacking back at the criminals who seek to do us harm. We've taken over leadership of the Counter Ransomware Initiative, a 38-country organisation which is assisting us in tackling this global problem. We have declared 82 systems of national significance. These are the pieces of infrastructure in our economy so important that if they did come under cyber attack, it would constitute a national security incident. We've set minimum cyber standards now for 11 sectors in the Australian economy. Now, Speaker, last week we kicked off the new National Cyber Security Exercise Program. This is a very important part of our national defence. The truth is, even if we do everything we can to prevent cyber attacks, we cannot reduce cyber risk to zero. So what is just as important as the deterrence piece is what we do when we think about recovery. Speaker, the first cyber exercise kicked off in financial services, so the government for the first time brought together the banks, the regulators and the parts of government that would assist if our financial services system came under attack. A business leader who participated in that program texted me on Friday night saying that it was the best government and industry collaboration he has ever worked in. And I'm really proud of that, Speaker,
Order.
proud of my department and proud of this government doing this important work for the first time for our country.
Order. Before I call the member for Clark, I'm pleased to inform the House that President of the Gallery today is Mr Tom Smith, the State Member for Bundaberg in the Queensland Parliament. A very warm welcome to you. Give the call to the member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Aged Care. Minister, most recommendations of the Aged Care Royal Commission have not been implemented, nor have the sector's pleas for more funding been met. As a result, many service providers can't reliably provide high-quality care, facilities are closing and numerous providers are facing difficult choices about whether they even stay in business. Minister, beyond some extra nurses and a pay rise, when will all 148 Royal Commission recommendations be implemented?
Order. The Minister for the NDIS will cease interjecting. It's far too much. Order. There was far too much noise at the conclusion of that question. Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
Yeah. I thank the member for Clark for his question. And like him, the Albanese Labor government has always recognised the steep challenges that face the aged care industry in this country, and we've never shied away from the scale of the response required. And I would argue that we have acted urgently in the first 12 months to address the scale of the crisis that we have confronted. And that is why I travelled to the member's home state of Tasmania earlier in this year to listen to the workers and the residents and the facility managers on the ground to 8 different facilities across Tasmania to hear their experiences and their ideas about how we address these problems and how we address them urgently. And I would argue that we have. A historic $36 billion funding injection in the budget is something the scale of which has not been seen in this parliament on aged care, and I think that that's important and meritorious. Also, this budget, that is only 3 weeks old, directly addressed 46 of the Royal Commission recommendations. 44. And that means that in our first 12 months in government, of the 148 recommendations, we've now addressed 69, which is almost half. And I accept there's a long way to go, and I've never shied away from the fact that we do have much more to do. But to go from 9 out of 148 in 15 months to 69 out of 148 in 12 months, I think expresses the scale of the urgency and the gravity that we take this problem. Now, to your point about providers facing difficult choices about staying open or closed, I direct you to Catholic Health, the Chief Executive, Pat Garcia. They run more than 25,000 aged care beds in this country. That is a huge number. They say that after this budget and the measures that were put in this budget, their providers are reassessing the once questionable viability of facilities in light of the new numbers that they saw in the budget. Southern Cross Care Queensland CEO Jason Eldering, who runs 12 homes in my home state, said that we welcome the government's budget because all new investment in aged care is welcome. Now, you've already mentioned our $2.5 billion commitment to 24/7 nurses and to increase care minutes, and to our life-changing $11.3 billion commitment to the pay rise for aged care workers. These are significant measures. These are unprecedented measures for aged care. They respond directly to the Royal Commission. And I also would say I think the member appreciates the need for honesty and for nuance in dealing with complex problems in an industry like aged care. So to go to the facility closures, there are closures, as there have always been, and that is not because of our staffing requirements. The facts are that there are more beds opening in aged care than there are closing.
That's right.
And more facilities closed in the last year of the previous government than have closed in the first year of our government. And the facilities closing in the last year of the former government were not closing because they prophetically foresaw the changes that would come.
Time has concluded. Order. The call to the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. How is the Albanese Labor government changing citizenship rules to provide a direct pathway to citizenship for New Zealand citizens and to support long-term residents who've been building their lives in the Australian community?
Call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Moreton for the question, and I recognise his long-standing advocacy on this issue for those in his community, but right around the country on this, which is basically an issue of fundamental fairness, an expression of our values, values we share with our friends over the ditch in New Zealand. Now, Speaker, ours is a country that has been built by citizenship, which is, of course, that common bond that unites all of us, those of us who became Australians by birth or those who became Australian by choice. This lies at the heart of a unified, cohesive and inclusive nation. Now, back in 2001, changes made by the Howard government made it much more difficult for New Zealanders in Australia to attain citizenship, and this had the long-term impact of creating a generation of permanently temporary migrants in our country. Now, we recognise that there are many New Zealanders here on special category visas who've been stuck without a clear pathway to citizenship, despite their contribution, raising their families here, working, paying taxes, contributing in voluntary capacities and building lives in Australia. And through my entire time in Parliament, Speaker, I've been engaging with this community and listening to their stories, some of which are very challenging, particularly in terms of some of the children in these families. And I want to acknowledge all of them who've been telling these stories, sharing them with me and my colleagues, in particular the Treasurer and the Minister for Home Affairs, who have been relentless advocates for their cause. I also want to recognise AusKiwi, the organisation that has brought together this story. Now, we've listened, and of course, under Prime Minister Albanese, we have acted. And from 1 July, New Zealand citizens living in Australia will now have a direct pathway to Australian citizenship. All special category visa holders will be able to apply directly for citizenship, as long as they meet the residence and other requirements. Now, these are changes that reflect the closeness of our relationship. It's a fair change, and importantly, it reflects the circumstances of Australians living in New Zealand. It is important to note that as a result of this change, eligible applicants will not be considered Australian residents as defined under the Social Security Act. But this will enhance people's economic and social integration into the community and provide additional opportunities, particularly for young people thinking about further study and, of course, for involvement in the ADF and the Australian Public Service. Mr Speaker, we are prepared for these changes next month because we've done so much work dealing with the citizenship backlog. As I've informed the House previously, we have slashed processing times. There's more to be done in this respect, but the caseload of citizenship applications is now at its lowest level for more than 6 years. This will facilitate us making more real our bondship with our friendship with people in New Zealand.
Give the call to the member for Wide Bay.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. This year alone, my community of Wide Bay has seen 20 people killed on our roads, 5 on the Bruce Highway. The previous coalition government committed to funding the life-saving Tyro bypass on the Bruce Highway. Can the minister confirm whether this project is subject to her infrastructure review? And if it is, why hasn't it been quarantined from the review, as has been done with the Brisbane Olympics?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for the opportunity to talk about the importance of the infrastructure investment pipeline, the integrity of that pipeline and the review that we are undertaking. The first thing I do want to say is that every single dollar of the $120 billion 10-year pipeline remains in the budget. We are committed to keeping that $120 billion pipeline. But what we have got is a problem when it came to the previous government when you looked at that infrastructure investment pipeline. When we last left office, there was about 140 projects in the pipeline. Now, today, there are 800 projects in the pipeline, a large number of them added in the 2016 and the 2019 election campaigns. There are 800 projects, incredibly important, that we actually look to see, can we deliver every single one of those? And the problem I am faced with, that I was left by the previous government, the mess that you left, is that you were more interested in the media announcement, you were more interested in the press release, you were more interested in standing there in your communities saying you were going to deliver than actually deliver. So in order to actually fund every one of those 800 projects would require billions and billions and billions of more dollars. So what we are trying to do is make sure that that $120 billion pipeline has projects that can be delivered. They are important projects, and I look forward to engaging with members as that review concludes.
Give the call to the member. The minister's concluded her answer. Give the call to the member. Order. The member for Riverina. The Minister for Infrastructure has concluded her answer. She doesn't need to continue. The member for Wide Bay and the Minister for Infrastructure can continue that discussion after question time. I give the call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. What steps is the Albanese Labor government taking to improve services and supports for veterans in the Northern Territory?
I give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Solomon for this important question. And I thank him also for his ongoing advocacy in support of veterans, not just in the electorate of Solomon that he represents, but across the entire top end. And it was my very great pleasure to be able to join the member for Solomon on Monday of this week in the opening of the Mates for Mates Veterans and Families Wellbeing Centre, a family and veterans hub
the member for Gippsland
put together with a $5 million contribution from the federal government, a hub that will be able to service not just the 7,500 veterans across the Northern Territory, but the 10,000 veterans across the Northern Territory. And we're doing this because we have a commitment to making sure that we are best coordinating the services made available to our veterans and their families in the places that we see the greatest concentration of those veterans. And so we're going to see out of the Mates for Mates Veterans and Families Wellbeing Centre that they'll be offering supports in transition, in employment, in education and training, in advocacy services, in mental health and physical health. But critically, it will provide a place for people to come together, to share a brew, have a barbecue, form connection, to provide that peer support to each other as veterans in the community, and that is critically important. But also, this hub joins our Veterans and Families Hub network, which we have funded to see the hubs learn from each other about what's working, what's not working, so that we can take the best of these hubs as we roll them out across the country with the further hubs that we will be establishing in the areas of highest need across Australia, which is an excellent contribution. But of course, this hub doesn't just stand on its own. This hub joins a suite of services that are being made available, including our contribution to fund the Scott Palmer Centre in Darwin, which is a veterans homeless service, which will see them supported there. Of course, I might point out what we really need as well is the Liberals, Nationals and the Greens to support our Housing Australia Future Fund so that we can support even more veterans who are homeless across the country with the support and services that they need. Meanwhile, we've also been fixing the backlog that we were left from the other side, which has declined now under our watch by 20% from the peak. Getting through that backlog, it's continuing to go down. we've been taking action on the recommendations from the Defence and Veterans Suicide Royal Commission, and of course we're working on reforming over a century now of legislation for veterans' entitlements. But can I say also, it was great to be able to sit down for an informal chat with the veterans at Mad Snake Cafe and with the member for Solomon, to hear from the front line about their experiences as veterans, about the services they need and how we can continue to deliver a better future for veterans and families in Australia.
Give a call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Student debt was indexed today at 7.1%, adding thousands of dollars to the already giant debts from uni fees. Prime Minister, you got to go to university for free, so why did your government do nothing to stop this indexation and even go so far as to block the Greens bill to free student debt and abolish indexation?
Give a call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I refer you to the answers I gave to the member for Clark last week, as well as to the member for North Sydney yesterday, where I directly answered that question. The fact is that there is a cost to getting a university degree, but there is also a value. The average income of somebody with a university degree today is about $100 grand, and the average income of somebody whose last year of education was year 12 is 70 grand. So that's a $30,000 difference each and every year. And the average amount of HECS debt amongst the people who have a HECS debt today is $24,000. People's repayments today don't change. It's important to make this point. This is not the way HECS works. It's not like a loan from a bank where when interest rates go up, your repayments go up. Repayments don't go up unless your salary goes
Leader
up.
of the Australian Greens has ceased to
The other point to make here is this. HECS is an interest-free loan. It's not like a bank where they lend you money, then they charge you interest and make a profit. The taxpayer doesn't make a profit here. The taxpayer lends $1 and they get that dollar back in real terms. That's it. No profit. If we make a change here, what this means is that taxpayers in all of our electorates have to pay more. And if we do what the Greens are suggesting, that's taxpayers paying $9 billion more. But more than that,
the Leader of the Australian Greens is warned.
It means that fewer people go to university, not more. Just a lucky few, a privileged few. And I want more people to go to university. I said yesterday there are some parts of the country where 70% of young adults have got a university degree. There are some places like Elizabeth in South Australia where it's 7%. Now, I want young people in Elizabeth to have the same shot at going to university as the young people at Elizabeth Bay. I do.
The Minister will order. The Minister will pause. I want to hear from the member for North Sydney on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's actually to direct relevance, and I would suggest to the Minister, if you don't have the answer, please feel free to take it on notice and feed back to us later.
Resume your seat. Order. The question was about student debt and about who got to go to university and whether people got to go to university for free. So that was an abuse of a point of order. So the member for North Sydney is warned. Order. We don't need commentary when I make a ruling for anyone in the House. I'm just going to allow the minister to continue in silence.
Mr Speaker, I want more people from poor backgrounds to go to university. I want more people from the regions to go to university. I want more people from the bush to go to university. I want more Indigenous Australians to go to university. And I've got to tell you, if we're going to use taxpayers' money to invest in our universities to help more people to go to university, then I make no apologies in saying I want it to be them.
Order. The member for Mitchell. The member for Mitchell will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the member for Cunningham in silence.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What are the lessons for the NDIS and Government Services portfolio, given the evidence before Senate estimates this week, on the contracts presided over by the department under the former Minister Stuart Robert?
The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister of Government Services has the call.
I thank the member for Cunningham for her question. The Senate estimates this week heard some evidence about the allocation and conduct of a particular contract given to a company called Salesforce. The background of this contract and the investigation was initially triggered following reports on the 1st of December last year. Following media reports, my agency heads reviewed contracts. They got Ian Watt to review procurement practices in the previous term and what observations there were to be made. Dr Watt has presented his review. This has been reported to the House. But in particular, the new leadership of the NDIA have had cause to review the contract entered into in February 2020 with Salesforce Australia for their CRM, their Customer Relationship Management software. The contract is valued at $76 million. It was initially intended as a small project, but it kept getting revised upwards and not delivering. Around the time the contract was entered into, there was a push to use Salesforce and other agencies across government. I'm informed that Microsoft was offering a similar product, but at a third of the cost. Within the agency, the NDIA, it was pushed by senior staff, including specifically hand-picked appointees of the previous government. The member for Fadden was the minister at the time. There were questions asked about the appropriateness of the contract, and the contractor who asked this question was sacked in 2021 under the previous government. After the change of government, Ernst Young had been brought in to do assurances and advise on the project. The problem is, I'm getting advice that we should be careful. I think you guys should have been a lot more careful when you were in charge. Potential issues include, and these are serious matters, the procurement documents, the assessment of alternative products, who was responsible officer for this project, how did they satisfy themselves there was value for money. So yet again, there seems to be an association between the missing member for Fadden, dodgy contracts and controversy. The CEO has confirmed that the contract was initiated when the member for Fadden was minister. I can now advise the parliament it's been referred to a forensic auditor. Staff have been referred to the APSC commissioner. It was not ruled out going to the National Anti-Corruption Commission, and also what we heard in committees yesterday, and it was a bit ironic listening to some of the earlier questions from the opposition today, a parliamentary committee chaired by the member for Macquarie has reviewed whether or not the former MP declared his friendship with the Consultants 360, and no conflict of interest was ever declared by the member for Fadden yet again.
Give the call to the member. Order. Give the call to the member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Order.
Does the minister agree with the following statement from a member of the government's Voice Referendum Working Group? And I quote,
Order.
The Voice
Order.
will be able to—
The member will resume his seat. The member for Latrobe is definitely out of order, interjecting. I'm trying to hear a question. I've got the member for Petrie, the minister having a conversation, which I can hear from here. So we're just going to reset the clock and allow the member for Durack to ask her question in silence. Give it the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Does the minister agree with the following statement from a member of the government's Voice Referendum Working Group? And I quote, "The Voice will be able to speak to all parts of the government, including the Cabinet, ministers, public servants and independent statutory officers and agencies such as the Reserve Bank. The Parliament won't be able to stop the Voice making those representations. It can't shut the Voice up." End of quote.
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The referendum working group that the member refers to is a group of Indigenous people, both from the Torres Strait and from mainland Australia. They are eminent leaders. They include Ken Wyatt, the previous Minister for Indigenous Affairs in the last government. It includes people like Noel Pearson. It includes people like Megan Davis. It includes people like Pat Turner. These are serious people, and they have guided the government on the way in which we have conducted ourselves in relation to the Voice for the Parliament. There is also an engagement group and a legal expert group. We have released a set of design principles that clearly answer the question that you have asked. The design principles are about how the voice will be made up, how it will be chosen, and most importantly, what its role will be. It will be a body that will provide independent advice to the Parliament, the Executive, on issues that affect First Nations people. Things like health, things like housing, things like education. The issues that are reported on every year in this House in the Closing the Gap report. That is what the Voice will contain itself to. It will not have a veto power, and it will not have a funding mechanism. It will not deal with things like parking tickets. It will not involve itself in Anzac Day, as scaremongers have said. This is a voice that is about improving the practical outcomes for First Nations people, and it is absolutely about recognising the extraordinary history that everyone in this chamber shares of 65,000 years of story and culture. The Voice will enhance democracy in this country, and it will enhance the way in which this parliament operates.
Order. Give the call to the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. After 12 months, how is the Albanese Labor government working to bring people together, bridge divides and build a better future?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Jagga Jagga for her question and for her contribution as an outstanding member there in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. 1 year ago, Australians did vote for change, and from day one we've worked hard to prove worthy of the trust that the Australian people placed in us, delivering on commitments, historic investments in Medicare, fee-free TAFE, cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines and energy bill relief, getting wages moving again, acting on climate change, a national anti-corruption commission, rolling out fibre-based NBN. We had an absolute commitment to build for a better future, and it is no accident that the theme of the budget was stronger foundations for a better future. Because 1 year in, we've been turning around a decade of denial and neglect and inaction by those opposite. But what's important isn't just what governments do, it's how they do them. It's how they do them. And I promised to work more collaboratively, and that is what we have been doing. Matt Coleman from the Commonwealth Bank. I've appreciated the way in which they have taken a whole-of-government and brought a collaborative approach. Ross McEwen from NAB. The government has been constructive and collaborative. The passing through Parliament of climate policy has provided business with clarity and certainty. Brad Banducci from Woolworths.
Order.
The government has provided, to quote him, a steady hand at the wheel. Reforms to boost workforce participation and health, such as the expanded childcare subsidies, paid parental leave scheme and increases to the Medicare rebate, are important in a tight labour market and will benefit many of our 180,000 hard-working team members. Jennifer Westacott, after more than a decade of uncertainty and equivocation, employers now have certainty about our emissions targets and how we're going to get there. Kelly Parker from Rio Tinto, the government has made a very strong start. The improvement in the relationship between Australia and China has been really pleasing to see. Mr Speaker, we have been a government that have been collaborative, that are working with all states and territory governments, that are working with local government, that are working with business, that are working with unions, that are working with civil society, that are working with women's groups, which is why putting women at the centre of the budget a fortnight ago is delivering. Because we want to deliver a better future and we want to take Australians with us on that journey of change. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.